They say true power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes, the quiet figure in the corner holds more influence than anyone realizes. That was exactly the case on an ordinary afternoon at Hudson International Airport in Stanton, where an unsuspecting black woman walked into the terminal, minding her own business. Little did the airline staff know, behind her polite smile and unassuming demeanor was a woman whose credentials could send shockwaves through their entire operation. Mocked and dismissed for her appearance, she remained calm until the insults piled up. Then, with one bold move, everything changed. Senator Naomi Cole stood at the entrance of Hudson International Airport's Terminal 4, pulling a modest carry-on suitcase behind her. She wore a sleek yet practical gray pantsuit, a simple black purse slung over her shoulder. Her close-cropped curls framed a face of quiet determination, her only jewelry a delicate gold necklace. She liked to travel light, no entourage, no flashy displays of power. It reminded her of her roots in Westbrook, where her parents had taught her the values of humility and resilience. Naomi was in her second term as a United States Senator from Vermont. Despite her national presence, people rarely placed her face when she wasn't on television or surrounded by the formalities of high office. She preferred it that way. It gave her the chance to experience daily life as her constituents did, unfiltered, real. That afternoon, she was en route to Washington, D.C., for urgent Senate committee hearings on economic reform. Her morning had been hectic, wrapping up a town hall in Burlington, taking half a dozen calls from colleagues, and rushing to make her early afternoon flight. She didn't expect special treatment, only standard courtesy. But as she navigated the bustling terminal, she noticed the occasional glance. Some travelers recognized her, but weren't entirely sure. Others simply thought she looked vaguely familiar. Reaching the Republic Air self-check-in kiosk, Naomi entered her reservation code and verified her seat details. A text from her chief of staff, Elise Carter, popped up, reminding her to be ready for back-to-back meetings upon landing. Naomi sighed. The job was relentless, but she embraced it. She had no idea her day was about to take a turn she never saw coming. Her mind was occupied with the usual travel frustrations, long lines, security checks, potential delays. What she didn't expect was a group of airline employees who, unaware of her identity, would treat her with open disrespect. She certainly couldn't predict how far they would take it, nor how they would regret it once they realized who she was. As she carried her luggage to the baggage counter, a storm was brewing, and her senator's ID? That was about to turn the tide. Even though she packed light, Naomi preferred to check one small suitcase so she could move freely through the airport. Approaching the Republic Air baggage drop counter, she found two uniformed employees leaning against the desk, looking bored. One was Brandon Tate, the other Megan Ellis, both in their mid-20s, wearing standard airline uniforms with their name tags clipped to their shirts. Naomi offered them a polite smile as she handed over her reservation details. "Good afternoon," she greeted warmly, setting a positive tone. Brandon barely looked up. His eyes flicked to the screen, and he muttered in a dull monotone, "ID, please." There was no greeting, no eye contact, just indifference. Naomi retrieved her driver's license from her purse and handed it over. She wasn't expecting friendly banter, but something about their body language felt off. Megan, who should have been helping, was too engrossed in scrolling through her phone beneath the counter. She smirked at something on the screen, stifling a quiet laugh. Brandon typed in Naomi's details, then suddenly frowned at the monitor. "Oh," he said, an edge of surprise in his voice. "Looks like you booked a first-class ticket." "That's correct," Naomi responded, maintaining her composure. She had purchased the seat herself. She needed the quiet space to review her committee documents, and she flew often enough to justify the cost. Brandon exchanged a glance with Megan, and something flickered across their faces. Amusement, maybe disbelief. Megan barely glanced up, giggling before returning her attention to her phone. Naomi's brow furrowed slightly, but she remained calm. She had faced worse in the political arena. Opponents who underestimated her, critics who belittled her. But this was unexpected from airline staff. "Is there a problem with my ticket?" she asked, her tone measured. Brandon shook his head. No problem," he muttered, though his tone suggested otherwise. He printed out the baggage tag and shoved it toward her. "Take your bag to the oversized drop area. Over there." He pointed vaguely, making it clear he had no intention of assisting further. Megan's laughter echoed in the background. Naomi felt a twinge of irritation, but swallowed it down. Courtesy was a two-way street, but some people simply refused to meet you halfway. For now, she let it slide. Yet something in her gut told her this wouldn't be the last time she'd have to deal with them. And she was right. Naomi reminded herself that respect was a two-way street, but some people simply refused to meet you halfway. For now, she let the incident at check-in slide. Yet a quiet voice inside her warned that this might only be the beginning. With her small carry-on rolling beside her, she made her way toward the TSA security checkpoint. She had already checked her suitcase at the Republic Air baggage counter, carefully ensuring her luggage tag was correct. Years of travel experience had taught her that small mistakes could cause big headaches. As she weaved through the winding ropes leading to the security screening area, she noticed a heated discussion unfolding a few lanes away. A frustrated traveler was arguing with TSA officers, gesturing wildly. Naomi felt a pang of sympathy. Airports were stressful places, and misunderstandings could escalate quickly. Thankfully, her own path was smoother. As a frequent traveler for official duties, she had TSA PreCheck, which allowed her to move through security with fewer restrictions. Naomi rarely flashed her Senate ID unless absolutely necessary. She believed in going through regular procedures like any other citizen. It kept her connected to the reality of everyday life. Placing her laptop and shoes into separate bins, she prepared to walk through the metal detector when faint snickers echoed from behind her. She turned her head slightly, careful not to make eye contact. It was them. Brandon Tate and Megan Ellis, the two Republic Air employees who had treated her so poorly at check-in, were now standing in the TSA line. Off-duty now, they were chatting casually, their eyes flicking toward her every few moments. For a second, Naomi wondered why airline staff would be going through security as if they were passengers. Then she remembered. Many employees flew non-revenue, taking advantage of travel perks or repositioning for work. She focused on her items in the tray, but their conversation was just loud enough to reach her ears. Megan scoffed. "First class, huh? Did you see her carry-on? Looks like something from a thrift store." Brandon chuckled. "The nerve of some people. Bet she scammed an upgrade or something." Megan giggled. "Right? She definitely doesn't belong up there with the business crowd." Their voices carried an unmistakable undertone of mockery, laced with assumptions about who deserved first-class treatment and who didn't. Naomi's chest tightened. She had faced criticism before. Public office made her a constant target for scrutiny. But this felt different. This wasn't about politics or policies. This was personal. An attack on her presence, her appearance, her right to be where she was. She took a slow breath, calming the heat rising in her veins. This wasn't the time to react. Not yet. Instead, she reminded herself a simple truth. Not everyone at Republic Air was like these two. Over the years, she had encountered countless airline employees who were professional, helpful, and kind. But Brandon and Megan, they were different. They had crossed a line. If their behavior worsened, she might have to step in, politely but firmly, to remind them that respect wasn't optional. For now, she collected her belongings from the security scanner and moved on, bracing herself for whatever awaited her at the gate. "Poor," Gate 17. That was her departure point for Republic Air Flight 927 to Washington, D.C. Checking her boarding pass, Naomi realized she had some time before boarding. A cup of coffee would help. The terminal was a buzzing hive of movement, families juggling restless toddlers, business travelers checking emails, young backpackers slumped against their suitcases. Airports fascinated Naomi. They were crossroads of humanity, filled with people from all walks of life, each carrying their own stories, their own destinations. She ordered a latte from a nearby cafe and found a small corner table in the seating area. She pulled out her tablet, scanning notes for her upcoming Senate committee hearing. She would be arguing for economic relief programs to support small businesses in struggling communities. It was a cause close to her heart. She had grown up watching her parents fight to keep their small auto repair shop afloat during Westbrook's economic downturn. She knew what it was like to scrape by, to work twice as hard for half the recognition. Halfway through reviewing her key points, a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Excuse me, ma'am. Can I speak with you for a moment?" Naomi looked up to see a Republic Air employee standing nearby, her name tag reading Jenna Patel. She had a warm, sincere smile, a stark contrast to the interactions Naomi had experienced earlier. Naomi set down her tablet and stood, offering a polite nod. "Of course. How can I help you?" Jenna hesitated for a moment before lowering her voice. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for any rudeness you might have experienced earlier." Naomi's eyebrows lifted slightly. So she had noticed. Jenna continued, "I'm not entirely sure what happened, but I saw Brandon and Megan at check-in earlier, laughing and whispering while they handled your ticket. It didn't sit right with me." A mix of gratitude and surprise flickered in Naomi's chest. "Thank you," she said. "I did notice some unprofessional behavior, but I assumed I might have been overreacting." Jenna shook her head. "No, you weren't. And you're not the first person to have trouble with them. There have been complaints." That didn't surprise Naomi. Jenna glanced toward the departure gates. "I don't have direct authority over them, but I just wanted to let you know. If you need any assistance, I'll be stationed near Gate 17. Please don't hesitate to ask." Touched by the unexpected kindness, Naomi gave her a genuine smile. "That's very kind of you. I'm all right for now, but I truly appreciate it." Jenna nodded before stepping away, returning to her duties. Naomi sat back down, her hands wrapping around her coffee cup. The tension she had felt earlier loosened just a little. Not everyone condoned behavior like Brandon and Megan's. And yet, Jenna's warning confirmed what Naomi already suspected. This wasn't over. If Brandon and Megan's attitude remained unchecked, it might escalate. Naomi wanted to believe in the best of people, but she also understood how prejudice, whether conscious or subconscious, could spread like wildfire. She returned to her notes, but the calm she had felt earlier had been replaced with something else, a quiet unease, and a determination to make sure they didn't get away with it. Naomi checked her watch. 30 minutes until boarding. She found a seat near the window, settling in with her coffee and returning to her committee hearing notes. Across the aisle, a young mother struggled to soothe her restless toddler, gently bouncing the child on her knee. Nearby, 2 businessmen in sharp suits debated market trends, their conversation animated. Naomi took it all in with a small smile. Every traveler had a story. Just as she was about to refocus on her work, a familiar, unwelcome sight appeared at the gate podium. Brandon Tate and Megan Ellis. Her stomach clenched. The same 2 employees from check-in, now stationed at the gate. They stood behind the counter, bored expressions plastered across their faces. Brandon idly tapped at the computer while Megan leaned in, whispering something in his ear. A moment later, she let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. Naomi pretended to be absorbed in her notes, but her pulse quickened. Then Brandon elbowed Megan. tilting his head slightly in Naomi's direction. Megan rolled her eyes and smirked before returning to the screen. They had noticed her. She reminded herself to stay calm. She had no intention of giving them the reaction they wanted. A few minutes later, an announcement crackled over the loudspeaker. Attention passengers on Republic Air Flight 927 to Washington National. We will begin pre-boarding shortly for passengers with disabilities, families with young children, and active military. Brandon's voice was flat and unenthusiastic. But Megan, she smirked directly at Naomi as the announcement ended. Naomi stayed seated, waiting for first-class boarding to be called. She had flown enough to know how these things worked, and yet an uneasy feeling settled in her chest. She suspected they weren't done with her yet. A sudden tap on her shoulder made her turn. A middle-aged woman standing beside her gestured toward the seat next to Naomi, the one where she had set her briefcase. "Excuse me, may I sit here?" the woman asked politely. Naomi immediately nodded. "Of course." She moved her briefcase onto her lap, placing her phone, wallet, and boarding pass inside. As she adjusted her belongings, she took a steady breath, mentally preparing for whatever might come next. The clock was ticking toward boarding. If Brandon and Megan planned to make trouble, she would soon find out. Little did they know, the real shock was still ahead. When Naomi arrived at Gate 17, the waiting area was alive with pre-boarding chaos. Families chasing after excited toddlers, business travelers typing furiously on their laptops, and weary tourists leaning against their overstuffed suitcases. The overhead screens flickered, briefly announcing a slight delay before a gate agent corrected it. Naomi barely reacted. Flight schedules shifted all the time. Instead, she scanned the crowded seating area. Most of the chairs were taken, so she opted to stand near a large window, using the time to go over her notes one last time. But no matter how hard she tried to focus, her attention kept drifting back to the two people stationed at the gate podium, Brandon and Megan. They were acting exactly as they had before, unprofessional, dismissive, and uninterested. Megan scrolled through her phone, only looking up to roll her eyes when passengers approached with questions. Brandon barely engaged with the crowd, tapping half-heartedly at the keyboard and answering inquiries with as little enthusiasm as possible. And yet, they still found time to smirk and whisper to each other, occasionally casting sideways glances in Naomi's direction. She kept her composure, but inside, her frustration simmered. In the Senate, she had debated some of the toughest politicians in the country. She knew how to endure scrutiny. But this felt different. She had done nothing wrong, just arrived at the airport, checked in, and taken her seat like any other passenger. And yet, she had been made a target by strangers who knew nothing about her. An announcement soon followed. Passengers requiring extra time or traveling with small children may now board. Parents gathered their little ones, adjusting backpacks and stroller handles as they lined up near the jet bridge. Naomi exhaled slowly. She knew first-class boarding was next, and that meant one final confrontation with Brandon and Megan. Once the last of the pre-boarding passengers disappeared down the jet bridge, Brandon cleared his throat. His voice echoed over the intercom. "We will now begin boarding for our first-class passengers and Republic Air executive members." Megan stood beside him, posture stiff, gaze scanning the waiting crowd, as if daring someone to step forward. Naomi took her time gathering her things. She grabbed her carry-on, checked her boarding pass, and walked toward the podium, taking her place in the short first-class line. She was fourth in line, right behind an older couple in matching beige windbreakers and a business traveler juggling two phones. It was a small queue, typical for a midday flight. As they inched toward the podium, Naomi caught Megan whispering something to Brandon. Whatever she said, it made Brandon smirk. The couple in front of Naomi didn't seem to notice the tension. casually handing over their boarding passes. Brandon and Megan processed them without issue, nodding politely as they stepped through. Then it was Naomi's turn. Nintuoim. Megan took Naomi's boarding pass, staring at the screen with an exaggerated squint, as if searching for something suspicious. Meanwhile, Brandon leaned in slightly, glancing at the monitor. Naomi Cole? Megan asked, raising an eyebrow. That's correct, Naomi replied evenly, offering a brief professional nod. Her voice was calm but firm. Megan tilted her head slightly. First-class seat, huh? Naomi didn't flinch. That's correct, she repeated. She had paid for first class with her own money, just like any other passenger who needed extra space to work. Brandon let out a quiet snort. His fingers tapped against the keyboard before he turned to Megan and whispered, loud enough for Naomi to hear. Gotta be careful. Some people try to sneak into first class without actually belonging here. Megan smirked. Naomi's patience was running thin. She straightened her shoulders. Is there a problem with my reservation? She asked. Megan hesitated for a moment, then plastered on a fake smile. No problem at all, she said, scanning the pass. Just needed to verify that you actually paid for this seat and didn't use miles or some other arrangement. Naomi narrowed her eyes slightly. I booked this ticket through my frequent flyer account and paid the difference for first class. It should be in your records. Megan waved the boarding pass dismissively. I'm sure it's fine, she said, her voice thick with condescension. It's just surprising how many people try to sneak upgrades. Brandon grinned. Gotta watch out for those free riders, he added. A tense silence settled around them. Naomi could feel eyes on her, passengers behind her, a businessman shifting uncomfortably, even the older couple now standing a few feet away, pretending not to listen but clearly paying attention. She tightened her grip on her carry-on. Enough was enough. She wasn't just any passenger, and soon Brandon and Megan were about to find that out. As Naomi moved closer to the gate, she caught the unmistakable sound of Brandon and Megan's voices. Oh, look who it is, Megan muttered under her breath, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Brandon let out a quiet snicker. The older couple ahead of Naomi glanced back, clearly sensing the tension, but they didn't linger. They handed over their boarding passes, received a brief nod of approval, and walked toward the jet bridge without issue. Then it was Naomi's turn. Megan took Naomi's boarding pass, staring at the screen with exaggerated scrutiny, as if expecting to find a flaw. Meanwhile, Brandon craned his neck, peering at Naomi with an expression hovering between smugness and doubt. Miss Cole, is it? Megan asked, raising a skeptical brow. Naomi held her gaze. That's correct. Her voice was level, calm, but firm. Megan's eyes flicked back to the screen. First-class seat, I see. She let the words hang in the air, the implication clear. Why would you be sitting in first class? Naomi refused to engage in the unspoken challenge. Yes. She had purchased her seat fair and square, just like any other traveler who wanted extra space to work. Brandon, still staring at the passenger manifest, gave a mocking hum as he tapped at his screen. Huh, that's interesting. He leaned toward Megan, whispering just loud enough for Naomi to hear. We should really double-check who we let into first class. Some people don't actually belong here. A flicker of anger shot through Naomi, but she controlled it. Her voice remained even. Is there a problem with my reservation? For the briefest moment, Megan hesitated, as if caught off guard by Naomi's directness. Then she pasted on a fake, overly sweet smile. No problem, Miss Cole, she said smoothly. She scanned the pass and handed it back with a slow, theatrical motion. We just need to confirm that you actually purchased this seat, rather than using miles you don't have, or any other kind of arrangement. A flash of confusion and irritation swept through Naomi. Excuse me? She kept her tone measured, but the implication wasn't lost on her. Brandon added with a smirk, You'd be surprised how many people try to sneak in an upgrade. Behind Naomi, the businessman juggling two phones cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. The older couple, who had already boarded, now stood a few steps away, clearly pretending not to eavesdrop. But they were listening. Naomi's jaw tightened, but her father's lessons echoed in her mind. Hold your head high. Don't let them see you sweat. She straightened her shoulders. I assure you, she said, her voice unwavering, there's no free riding here. Megan gave an indifferent shrug, handing back the boarding pass with a slow, almost mocking motion. Then by all means, enjoy your flight. Her tone suggested anything but a sincere wish. Naomi clutched her carry-on tightly and stepped forward. She had endured smirks, dismissiveness, and prejudice before. But she also knew, once the plane was in the air, the real battle would begin. If Brandon and Megan thought they could keep pushing her, they were about to learn a harsh lesson in underestimating the wrong person. As she walked down the jet bridge, Naomi's stomach churned, not with nerves, but with a slow-burning frustration. Her thoughts turned to her responsibilities waiting in Washington. There were pressing economic issues to tackle, policies that would directly impact the people she served. This nonsense at the airport? She didn't have time for it. But if they kept pushing, she thought, she would not hesitate to push back, no matter the consequences. At the aircraft door, a flight attendant greeted her with a warm smile. His name tag read Ethan Reynolds. Good afternoon, ma'am. Welcome aboard. His voice was genuine, his demeanor professional, a small relief. Thank you, Naomi replied, stepping inside. For the first time since arriving at the airport, she felt a brief moment of ease. Not everyone in this airline shared Brandon and Megan's contempt. Yet, as she moved toward her first-class seat, she caught a glimpse of movement through the cabin door. Megan's mocking expression. And just like that, Naomi knew. This ordeal wasn't over. Naomi stepped into the bright, spacious first-class cabin of the Republic Air 737. The plush seats offered a welcome contrast to the tension she had just endured. This was exactly why she had booked first class, not for luxury, but for peace. She found her seat, 2A, and quickly stowed her belongings in the overhead bin. Her phone buzzed with messages from Elise, her chief of staff. But Naomi took a moment to breathe before responding. She could still feel the sting of Brandon and Megan's words, their disdain lingering like an unwelcome shadow. She buckled in, willing herself to focus on the work ahead. That's when Ethan approached her again, his demeanor kind. Good afternoon, ma'am. May I offer you a drink before takeoff? We have water, juice, or champagne. Naomi offered a polite smile, grateful for the simple courtesy. Just water for now. Thank you. He nodded and returned moments later, placing a chilled bottle of water and a cup on the tray beside her. She thanked him quietly, inwardly relieved to finally be treated with professionalism. As passengers continued filing into first class, Naomi recognized a few faces from the gate area. The business traveler, the older couple, the young mother with an infant. Then, to her surprise, Brandon and Megan entered the first-class cabin. Naomi's stomach tightened. It wasn't unusual for gate agents to board before departure, sometimes handling last-minute tasks or coordinating with the crew. But something about the way they carried themselves, purposeful, eyes scanning the cabin, sent a warning through Naomi's gut. She pretended to focus on her phone, but in her peripheral vision, she watched as Megan whispered something to Ethan. The flight attendant's expression shifted slightly. Not alarmed, but perplexed. Naomi didn't know what had just been said, but her instincts told her it wasn't good. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Naomi kept her focus on her phone, pretending to be immersed in her emails. But her peripheral vision tracked every movement. Brandon and Megan had boarded the plane. It wasn't unusual for gate agents to step inside for last-minute coordination with the crew. but their determined stride sent a warning bell through Naomi's gut. They weren't here for routine work. They were here for her. She watched as Megan leaned in and whispered something to Ethan, the flight attendant. His expression darkened, his eyes flickering toward Naomi. Brandon stood behind Megan, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at his lips. Ethan held up a calming hand, as if signaling for Megan to stop, but she kept talking. Her tone grew sharper, more insistent. Finally, Ethan sighed and nodded reluctantly. Then he walked toward Naomi's seat. She braced herself. Miss Cole, Ethan said softly, though Naomi could feel the weight of the cabin's attention shifting toward them. She looked up, catching the curious stares of nearby passengers. Yes? Ethan hesitated, then glanced back at Brandon and Megan, before leaning in slightly. They're asking to verify your boarding pass. Naomi felt a sharp jolt of disbelief. Excuse me? She had already shown her boarding pass at the gate. She had been scanned, cleared, and seated. Why was this a question now? Ethan's discomfort was clear. I'm sorry, ma'am, he said, his voice lowering. They claimed there was an error on the manifest and need to double-check your seat assignment. Naomi's jaw tightened. She had been in politics long enough to recognize bureaucratic nonsense used as a cover for something more insidious. Fine. Keeping her expression neutral, she opened her phone's wallet app and produced her boarding pass again. Ethan scanned it with a handheld device. A sharp beep confirmed what Naomi already knew. Her seat was valid. Ethan's relief was almost visible as he turned back toward Brandon and Megan. She's fine. Seat 2A is confirmed. No errors. For a brief second, Naomi thought that would be the end of it. But then, Megan narrowed her eyes, and Brandon shook his head, looking unconvinced. They still weren't letting it go. Naomi took a slow, calming breath. She had done absolutely nothing to warrant this scrutiny. Yet their suspicion clung to her like a shadow. Across the first-class cabin, a few passengers whispered to each other, shooting glances toward her seat. She realized, to an outsider, the entire situation might look like she had done something wrong. That thought made her stomach tighten with frustration. An older flight attendant named Margaret, with silver-streaked hair and a seasoned air of authority, approached the scene. She lowered her voice, addressing Megan. Is there an issue? Megan waved her off dismissively. Just making sure everything's in order. Margaret's eyes darted to Naomi, then back to Megan. Her disapproval barely concealed. But Naomi had already made up her mind. She would not be put on trial in the middle of first class, and she would not let them reduce her to a spectacle. The plane's door closed with a definitive thud, sealing them all inside. A voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Republic Air Flight 927 to Washington National. Estimated flight time, 1 hour and 45 minutes, weather permitting. Megan and Brandon finally turned to leave, but before they did, Megan shot one last glance at Naomi, shaking her head with a smirk. Brandon whispered something, chuckled under his breath, and followed her out. Naomi's fingers curled into a fist against her lap. Her anger simmered low in her stomach, controlled, but very much alive. She turned her head, looking out the small oval window as the plane taxied away from the gate. Row after row of aircraft dotted the runways, each one carrying people with different stories, different lives, different destinations. Flying should be simple. The job of airline staff should be to ensure a smooth experience for all passengers. Not to single people out, not to mock them. But prejudice had a way of creeping in where it didn't belong. Margaret and Ethan went through the safety demonstration. Naomi forced herself to pay attention, if only to distract her mind from the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She gripped the armrest, inhaling and exhaling slowly. She reminded herself that once she'd landed in Washington, D.C., her focus had to shift. There was real work to be done, legislation to fight for, a committee hearing that needed her full attention. Yet, a part of her remained unsettled. If Megan and Brandon tried anything else, Naomi would not remain silent. She had endured far too much in her life to let this pass without consequence. Since sometimes, the best way to fight injustice was to stare it down, and if necessary, to show people exactly who they were dealing with. 30 minutes into the flight, the seatbelt sign blinked off. Ethan and Margaret moved through the aisle, offering drinks and small plates to the first-class passengers. Normally, Naomi would take this moment to relax, maybe review a briefing packet. But she couldn't. Her nerves were still on edge, playing back every smirk, every hushed whisper, every look of doubt thrown her way. Her phone, now in airplane mode, was filled with messages from Elise, her chief of staff. One message stood out. "Heads up, new economic data just came in for your hearing. It could shift our talking points. We'll brief you when you land." Naomi tried to immerse herself in the numbers, but then a soft chime over the intercom interrupted her thoughts. A voice followed. Ethan, please report to the forward galley." It was Margaret, and she sounded anxious. Naomi's pulse quickened. Ethan excused himself, walking briskly toward the front. Sensing tension, Naomi discreetly turned her head. And there they were, Megan and Brandon. Again, she blinked. How had they even gotten back on board? Gate agents didn't stay after departure. They weren't supposed to. Had they remained on the plane the entire time? Or had they jumped on as non-revenue passengers? Whatever the case, Naomi's jaw set. This wasn't over. And if they were about to pull another stunt, they were about to regret it. Naomi couldn't hear every word, but fragments of the conversation reached her ears. "She's definitely not who she says she is," Megan muttered. "Something's off with her credentials," Brandon added. Ethan's face twisted in confusion. Margaret, the senior flight attendant, tried to de-escalate. She shook her head, clearly disagreeing with their accusations. But Naomi's pulse soared. Enough was enough. She unbuckled her seatbelt, ignoring the watchful eyes of other passengers, and rose from her seat. Without hesitation, she walked up the aisle, heading straight toward the confrontation. Ethan looked relieved when he saw her, but Megan stiffened, arms crossing over her chest. "Is there a problem?" Naomi asked, her tone firm but measured. She refused to be a passive bystander in her own humiliation. Megan glared at her. "We have reason to believe your documentation is fraudulent." She flipped out her phone, showing Ethan something on the screen. "There's no record of a Naomi Cole, of your background paying for a first-class seat." The emphasis on your background stung like a blade. Brandon added, "Why don't you just come clean about how you got this seat?" A surge of anger so intense nearly made Naomi tremble. She had faced criticism, scrutiny, even outright hostility in her career. But never had she experienced such blatant disrespect on an airline flight. Ethan tried to intervene. "We already scanned her boarding pass. Everything checks out." Megan brushed him aside. "I'm sure you can check out anything if you have the right counterfeit or stolen information." Her voice was calm but dripping with accusation. "Let me see your ID, Miss Cole. Right now." Naomi's heart pounded, but not from fear. This was a decision point. She could play along, show them her driver's license again, or she could end this charade once and for all. The lines had been drawn. They had underestimated her. Slowly, she reached into her purse, her fingers brushing past her driver's license, landing instead on the leather pouch that held something far more powerful. A small, but irrefutable, piece of identification. She had always been careful about flaunting her position. She had earned her place through years of public service and an unshakable dedication to justice. But Brandon and Megan had pushed past every boundary of decency. She withdrew her United States Senate ID and held it up for Megan, Brandon, Ethan, and Margaret to see. The official seal of the U.S. Senate gleamed under the cabin lights. Naomi's voice was controlled, but the fury underneath was unmistakable. "You want proof?" she asked. "I am Senator Naomi Cole of Vermont. This is my identification." A stunned silence fell over the galley. Megan's smirk vanished. Brandon's eyes darted from the ID to Naomi's face, his jaw slack with disbelief. Ethan looked stunned, then deeply apologetic. Margaret gasped softly, realizing the gravity of the situation. The entire power dynamic in the cabin shifted in an instant. Naomi didn't let them off the hook. "You have harassed me from the moment I checked in," she said. "You accused me of fraud. You implied I didn't belong here. And now that you know exactly who I am, would you care to explain yourselves?" Megan opened her mouth, but only managed a sputtered, "I—" Brandon swallowed hard, then forced out a shaky apology. We didn't, we had no idea." Naomi's anger surged, controlled but razor-sharp. "No, you didn't. And that's the point." She took a slow step forward, making sure every word landed. "You had no idea who I was, yet you treated me with open contempt. Your personal biases have no place in an airline that claims to uphold professionalism and respect. This is unacceptable behavior toward any passenger, senator or not." Brandon had nothing to say. Megan's face burned red, her arrogance crumbling. Ethan, still holding Naomi's ID, looked at it once more. There was no denying the authenticity. Finally he spoke, his voice laced with regret. "Senator Cole," he said, "I'm so sorry this happened on my flight. We want all passengers to feel safe and respected. I need to inform the captain about this incident immediately." Naomi nodded. "Yes, please do. And when we land, I expect to speak with a senior manager from Republic Air about this." Her tone left no room for argument. Ethan turned toward the cockpit, moving swiftly. Margaret hovered apologetically, clearly embarrassed by what had transpired. Meanwhile, Megan and Brandon stood paralyzed, exchanging frantic whispers. Their earlier bravado had evaporated. They had been so confident in their judgment, so sure of their assumptions. Now they stood exposed, caught in the blazing heat of the truth. Naomi, still feeling the adrenaline in her veins, clenched her hands into fists and forced herself to breathe deeply. She could almost hear her parents' voices in her head, reminding her to stay composed under pressure. After all, composure often carried more power than a raw fury. Passengers in nearby seats noticed the commotion. Some had already recognized her name now that it had been spoken aloud. A soft murmur rippled through the first few rows of economy, where curious eyes peered over seatbacks. The scene had become a mini public spectacle. Finally, Ethan returned. "Senator Cole, the captain would like to speak with you in the forward galley." Naomi nodded and followed him. As she passed by, she caught one last glimpse of Megan and Brandon. Their expressions were no longer arrogant, no longer filled with smug amusement. They had pushed too far, and now the consequences were coming. Brandon stood off to the side, his expression a mixture of shame and apprehension. Naomi saw it, but felt no sympathy. This was the cost of their actions. In the narrow corridor near the cockpit, a figure stood waiting. Captain Eleanor Price. Her crisp uniform and composed demeanor projected authority, but her eyes carried something else, an unspoken apology. "Senator Cole," she began quietly, "I've been briefed on the situation. Let me start by saying I sincerely apologize on behalf of Republic Air. This is unacceptable. Every passenger should be treated with dignity, and you in particular should never have been subjected to this. Naomi raised a hand gently, cutting off the formalities. Captain, I appreciate your immediate attention, she said. But I want to make one thing clear. I expect accountability. Brandon and Megan have harassed me repeatedly, not just once. Whether I'm a senator or not is irrelevant. No passenger should have to endure this kind of treatment. Captain Price nodded, her expression earnest. I agree, she said. I will be contacting our operations team as soon as we land. A representative will meet you at the gate. I assure you we take these complaints very seriously. A sudden jolt of turbulence shook the plane, punctuating the conversation. Naomi steadied herself, gripping the counter. Thank you, she managed, regaining her balance. I'll return to my seat now. As she walked back down the aisle, she felt a range of gazes upon her. Pity, respect, curiosity, even confusion. The entire cabin buzzed with unspoken tension. She had taken a stand, and now she had to see it through. When Naomi reached her seat, Ethan discreetly approached her. Senator, do you mind if Brandon and Megan offer you an apology? He asked softly. They insist on speaking with you. She weighed her options. Part of her wanted nothing more to do with them, but public figures like herself had to navigate these moments with grace. All right, she said, with a measured nod. They can come here, but I'm not in the mood for excuses. Moments later, Brandon and Megan appeared, looking like children forced to apologize in the principal's office. Megan opened her mouth first, but no words came out. Brandon cleared his throat awkwardly. Senator Cole, we're really sorry about the misunderstanding, he stammered. There were, irregularities in the passenger manifest. Megan jumped in, her eyes darting nervously. We didn't mean any harm, she said quickly. We just thought someone might be using a fake identity to get a free upgrade. It happens sometimes, you know. Naomi's gaze remained steady. So you immediately assumed I was committing fraud because... Megan's face flushed. We, didn't recognize you. And your seat assignment flagged in our system. That's all. Naomi inhaled slowly. She had encountered these half-baked excuses before. In politics, in life. Whether or not you recognized me shouldn't matter, she said, her voice calm but sharp. Every passenger deserves the presumption of honesty, especially if they've presented valid credentials at check-in, at the gate, and again on board. You crossed the line from diligence into harassment. Brandon grimaced. I know we messed up. Naomi's response was curt and undeniable. Yes, you did. Megan looked on the verge of tears, but Naomi couldn't tell if it was genuine remorse or simply the humiliation of being caught. We truly are sorry, Megan whispered. We never thought. We didn't know you were... She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Naomi tilted her head slightly, waiting. Finally, she decided to help Megan find the words. A senator? She said, her tone edged with challenge. Megan nodded, eyes dropping to the floor. Naomi leaned forward just slightly. Does that make me more worthy of respect? She asked. Or is it just the shock that you offended someone with a high-profile position? Neither Brandon nor Megan could respond. They stood mute, ashamed, exposed. Naomi took one last steady breath. If you are truly sorry, she said, then I hope you take a hard look at your assumptions. I accept your apology, on the condition that your behavior changes, not just toward me, but toward every passenger who might look different than you expect. They mumbled their gratitude and slunk away. Naomi sat down, unbuckling the tension in her shoulders. The immediate confrontation was over, but the real reckoning would come after landing. She had no intention of letting this slide without consequences. Senator or not, accountability was paramount. The remainder of the flight was subdued, yet electric with gossip. Naomi could sense it. Nearly everyone in first class knew who she was now, and word had likely spread to coach. Still, the flight crew maintained a professional facade. Each time Ethan or Margaret passed Naomi's seat, their faces held quiet apologies. Once the aircraft began its descent, Captain Price's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our final approach into Washington National. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened." Naomi peered out the window, catching the first glimpse of the familiar skyline of Washington, D.C. Though she had flown into the city countless times, each approach carried a certain weight. This city was the heart of legislative power, the stage upon which she fought for her constituents. The wheels touched down smoothly, and a wave of relief washed over her. She was eager to exit the plane, meet with Republic Air's senior representative, and address the fiasco properly. Her schedule in D.C. was packed with committee work, but first, she had to ensure that Republic Air took her complaint seriously. Naomi's phone buzzed sharply as soon as the plane rolled to a stop. A message from Elise, her chief of staff. "Heard you had a situation on your flight. Are you okay? Media inquiries are already swirling." Naomi sighed, realizing just how fast news traveled. Someone must have tipped off a news outlet or posted on social media about the incident. There was no containing it now. Passengers in economy began to deplane, filing past first class as flight attendants thanked them for flying Republic Air. Ethan approached her seat quietly. "Senator Cole, we have a corporate manager waiting for you at the jet bridge. She'd like to speak with you privately." Naomi nodded, collected her briefcase, and stood. Megan and Brandon were nowhere to be seen, likely hiding in the galley or slipping off the plane to avoid further confrontation. Margaret, the senior flight attendant, offered Naomi a small, supportive smile as she wheeled her carry-on toward the exit. The moment Naomi stepped off the aircraft, she spotted a woman in a crisp navy suit, the Republic Air logo pinned neatly to her lapel. Her name tag read Rachel Lawson, Customer Relations Manager. She wore a pinched expression of concern as she extended a hand. "Senator Cole, I'm Rachel Lawson. I'm here to address the incident that occurred on your flight." Naomi shook her hand, setting aside her frustration. "For now. I appreciate you meeting me here, but we need to talk about what just happened and how Republic Air intends to handle it." With that, they stepped aside from the stream of passengers, heading toward a quiet corner of the terminal. The next phase of accountability was about to begin. In a small seating area near the gate, Naomi took a seat across from Rachel. Rachel pulled out a tablet, her fingers poised to take notes. "Senator Cole, first and foremost, I extend a sincere apology on behalf of Republic Air. We strive to ensure that every passenger feels welcome, and I'm disheartened to learn of your experience." Naomi nodded, appreciating the direct acknowledgement. "Thank you," she said. "But an apology is just the first step. Megan and Brandon repeatedly harassed me, questioned my legitimacy, and mocked my presence in first class, before and during the flight. They only backed down when I presented my Senate ID." Rachel sighed, tapping a few notes onto her screen. "I'm already aware of the key points from the flight crew's initial report. Captain Price filed a statement as well." She paused. "May I ask, do you wish to file a formal complaint, or are you considering legal action?" Naomi's jaw tightened. "I want to file a formal complaint," she said. "I also want to ensure that these employees face disciplinary measures and undergo proper training so this doesn't happen again. Whether I pursue legal action will depend on how the airline responds." Rachel's professional mask barely faltered, but Naomi caught the flicker of tension behind her composed demeanor. "I understand. We take these matters very seriously. Megan and Brandon will be placed on immediate suspension while we conduct a thorough investigation. If they are found responsible for violating our code of conduct, particularly regarding discrimination, they could be terminated. Naomi let that sink in. She wasn't seeking revenge, but she believed that real change required real consequences. I hope the investigation is swift and fair. I may be a public figure, but no passenger should have to endure what I did. She met Rachel's gaze directly. I've faced racial bias my entire life. I'm not about to let this slide without accountability. Rachel nodded firmly. Absolutely. I'll escalate this to our Vice President of Customer Experience. As part of our remediation, we'd also like to offer you a complimentary round-trip ticket or a refund for your travel costs. Naomi waved a dismissive hand. I'm not looking for freebies. I want the airline's culture to change, so that next time, someone who doesn't fit the mold of a first-class passenger isn't treated like a criminal. Rachel paused, her gaze solemn. That's our goal too, Senator Cole. I'll keep you updated on the investigation. In the meantime, please accept our deepest apologies. This is being addressed at the highest levels of management. Naomi exhaled slowly. She had a full schedule waiting for her in the Senate, but she knew this battle wasn't over. The consequences for Megan and Brandon were already in motion, and Republic Air's reputation now hinged on how they handled the fallout. By the time Naomi arrived at Capitol Hill, her phone was buzzing nonstop. Elise intercepted her outside the Russell Senate office building, her face etched with urgency. Senator, we have media inquiries from CNN, MSNBC, The Washington Post. Everyone wants a statement about the airline incident. Naomi suppressed a groan. She had hoped to handle this quietly, but in the age of social media, privacy was a luxury. All right, she said, shifting gears. Let's be strategic. Set up a short press briefing after my committee hearing. I need to focus on the policies we're discussing first, but I'll address the airline situation as well. Elise nodded sharply. Understood. The hearing on economic reform starts in 20 minutes. They'll want your opening remarks. Naomi took a deep breath, steeling herself. She walked briskly through the corridors, aware of the dual responsibilities now weighing on her shoulders. Her legislative duties had always been her priority, fighting for economic policies that would uplift small businesses and underserved communities. But now she had also become an unexpected voice against racial discrimination in air travel. As she entered the committee chamber, she pushed aside the morning's ordeal. For now, she had a job to do, and justice, on multiple fronts, was still unfolding. The moment the Senate hearing concluded, Naomi barely had time to gather her notes before the press swarmed. Microphones were thrust toward her, cameras flashing, voices overlapping in rapid-fire questions. Senator Cole, can you confirm you were harassed by Republic Air staff? Is it true you had to show your Senate ID just to prove you belonged in first class? Will you be filing a lawsuit against the airline? Naomi raised a steady hand, silencing the barrage. She took a measured breath, then spoke with clarity. Yesterday, I experienced an incident of bias from 2 Republic Air employees. Their behavior singled me out and questioned my right to be in first class. While I'm disappointed, I am not shocked. Racial bias is real, and it can show up anywhere. She let the words hang, then continued. I have filed a formal complaint. I trust that Republic Air's leadership will conduct a thorough investigation and take the appropriate action. My primary focus remains ensuring that all passengers, regardless of status, skin color, or background, can travel without facing discrimination. The reporters pressed for more, but Naomi kept her answers concise. She refused to let this airline incident overshadow her legislative work. Yet she understood the power of this moment. By speaking out, she wasn't just telling her own story. She was drawing attention to a larger issue, one that countless travelers faced every day. And so be key. As Naomi stepped away from the press, her phone buzzed again. An email from Rachel Lawson, Republic Air's Customer Relations Manager. Senator Cole, I wanted to personally update you. Megan and Brandon have been suspended pending investigation. Naomi exhaled. Hard karma was already setting in. But this was only the first step. Two days later, Naomi awoke to a flood of notifications. Headlines splashed across major news outlets. Republic Air employees suspended after harassing black U.S. senator. Pundits debated whether the staff's actions were isolated bias or part of a larger systemic problem. Naomi tried not to let the media frenzy distract her. She remained focused on her legislative duties while quietly monitoring the airline's response. Late that afternoon, her phone rang. Rachel Lawson's voice was calm but serious. "Senator Cole, I have important updates from our internal investigation." Naomi sat upright, bracing herself. Rachel hesitated, then continued. "We found that Megan and Brandon have a track record of unprofessional conduct, including prior complaints for rudeness. Their behavior toward you violated multiple corporate policies, particularly regarding bias and harassment." Naomi's posture stiffened. "And the outcome?" Rachel sighed. "They have both been terminated. This was not a decision we made lightly, but their actions were blatant, and multiple witness statements confirmed the misconduct." Naomi took a slow breath, absorbing the weight of those words. She never took pleasure in someone losing their job, but she also understood real consequences were necessary for real change. Rachel continued, "Additionally, we're rolling out a mandatory training program on diversity and inclusion for all customer-facing staff. It begins next week." That caught Naomi's interest. She had seen too many corporate apologies amount to nothing. This, however, was a tangible step forward. "I appreciate the swift action," she finally said. "I hope this sends a clear message that discrimination has no place at Republic Air or anywhere else." Rachel's voice carried a note of optimism. "That's exactly our goal, Senator. And we'd also value your input, if you'd be willing to share thoughts on how we shape our training moving forward." Naomi offered a tight smile, even though Rachel couldn't see it. "I'll consider it. Thank you for the update." As she hung up, Naomi leaned back in her chair, letting the moment settle. Had Megan and Brandon simply treated her with basic courtesy, none of this would have happened. Instead, their mocking assumptions had led to an explosive reckoning, one that forced Republic Air to examine its own internal culture. Well, Ray, the last wave of karma landed when a local news station interviewed a tearful Megan who tried to defend herself. "I never intended to be racist," she said. "I just assumed the senator couldn't afford first class." The public backlash was swift. Social media erupted, pointing out that Megan's assumptions were precisely the problem. Through it all, Naomi remained steadfast in her purpose. She had no interest in personal vendettas, only in fairness and justice. Yet she couldn't deny a small sense of relief that the matter had been settled with firm repercussions. Some stories take flight in ways we never expect. For Senator Naomi Cole, a routine trip from Hudson International to Washington, D.C., became a stark reminder that prejudice can lurk in even the most ordinary places. But in the end, her quiet resolve and powerful credentials combined to deliver a swift reckoning for those who had mocked and underestimated her. Yet this story is bigger than a single confrontation. It's a wake-up call for businesses, for individuals, for society as a whole. We need to check our biases. We need to stand up against discrimination. We need to ensure that every traveler, whether a high-ranking official or an everyday citizen, receives the respect they deserve.